Thanks for tuning in to The World We Want, the NAAEE podcast, a project of the North American Association for Environmental Education. If these episodes resonate with you, after the podcast, check out our website, which contains opportunities for professional development, resources for educators and administrators, and guidance on how you can incorporate environmental education into a broader teaching strategy. Visit us at naee.org/podcast. And thanks for listening.
Welcome to The World We Want. Hi, I'm your host, Jerry Ellis. You know, most people who care about the environment eventually find themselves asking a difficult question. Am I really making a difference? It's a question that doesn't have a simple answer, and perhaps that's why so many of us continue to ask it. Am I really making a difference?
I ask myself that question nearly every day because I feel like, am I doing anything at all? Am I doing enough? The problems are so big.
My guest today is Crystal DiMi. She has spent years talking with conservationists, scientists, educators, and community leaders through her podcast, Forces for Nature. Along the way, she's explored how people from many different backgrounds are finding ways to care for wildlife, strengthen communities, and reconnect with the natural world. Crystal is also part of the emerging wildlife conservation leaders community, where collaboration, mentorship, and shared learning have helped shape her own journey as an environmental communicator. As our conversation unfolds, you'll hear that Crystal isn't simply collecting stories about change. She's asking many of the same questions her guests ask themselves. How do we stay hopeful? How do we keep learning? How do we find a place in our work that is much larger than ourselves? Those questions take us from the mountains of New Zealand to classrooms, neighborhoods, and conversations about the world we all hope to build together. Today, we begin with one question that continues to guide Crystal's own journey. What can I actually do? Hi, Crystal, and welcome to The World We Want. Thank you for doing this.
Hi, Jerry. It's so good to see you. Thank you for inviting me today.
As I said in the intro, you are a podcaster and you have this amazing podcast, Forces for Nature, which we're going to talk about a little bit. What does it feel like to be on the other side of the microphone, to not be the host and be the guest?
Funny enough, it's a little nerve-wracking. I'm a little nervous. I don't know why it's so silly.
I've only done it once, and it was like, okay, I got to get all my answers in a row.
Right? Like, I got to sound eloquent and fluent and well-spoken.
I wanted to start with something that you have such a perspective on, partly by being a podcast host on your Forces for Nature, but also all the work that you've done around environmental education. I think a lot about, and I think a lot of people think a lot about wildlife and the environment and what's happening on our planet. There's so much, and it can become such this heavy weight over everyone. And at some point, you just kind of hit this wall and say, what can I actually do? Have you hit one of those walls?
The ironic part is that what I promote with Forces for Nature, the podcast and the overall company, is that I help people answer that question for themselves. And yet I ask myself that question nearly every day because I feel like, am I doing anything at all? Am I doing enough? The problems are so big, and how could I possibly be making an impact? And so, yeah, I hit that wall often, but I
think that's the core question behind The World We Want. This podcast is in trying to picture the world we want. We say, okay, there it is. There's the goal. There's, if everything worked, that would be this beautiful place that I live. But en route, there's so many hurdles we start to encounter that sometimes I think it's easy to lose sight of the goal because we're just like bumping into these walls, bumping into these hurdles. And I know that's what you focus on, is the positive action that people take. And a lot of the extraordinary guests that you've had on your podcast But I was wondering about you personally, how you tackle that.
I think I need to always remind myself and come back to the saying, think global, act local, because I receive all these email newsletters, and on social media, the algorithm, always shows me all the things. So I'm always bombarded with these large, big global problems that we're facing. And it's really overwhelming. And what I finally learned is that I need to act locally in order to, one, keep myself motivated, and two, to see that there is actually progress being made. One example of this is years ago when I was living in Panama, where I was actually a lot throughout the city. There are just many cats and dogs all around. There are strays, but then a lot of them were people's pets. It's just part of the culture to let them run free throughout the day. And so that meant there was a lot of breeding going on and a lot of puppies and kittens being had. And there was an organization called Spay Panama whose mission it was to try to keep the cat and dog population controlled. And so, I could have looked at the whole situation as being overwhelming, and that there were so many homeless cats and dogs, and they're not as healthy and they don't have really good well-being. But I decided to do something for my neighborhood and bring in Spay Panama. So I fundraised for it. I figured out all the logistics for it. I did the marketing for it. And I remember the day of, it was before we opened the doors. I was walking down a side street and I didn't see anybody at the building that we were holding it in. And I was just like, oh man, like is this all for naught? I turned the corner and now we're an hour before the doors are going to open. And there's a line down the block of people with their pets there to be spayed and neutered. I just felt so elated. And by the end of the day, or if it was the whole weekend, we had spayed and neutered a few hundred animals. No, that might not have solved the larger overpopulation problem, but it did benefit those animals and those families that we worked with that day. And it also started to help change, socially normalize spaying and neutering, because in parts of Latin America, that's still kind of an idea that's rejected. So I didn't solve the larger issue, but I helped the local issue, and I feel is the way we all need to look at it, because if we're all trying to make our own local impacts, it'll add up.
It really does help you keep going. But I think the other thing that I find is, because a lot of our work for Globio, the nonprofit behind this co-production for The World We Want, is we work in the tropics mostly, across equatorial Africa, Borneo, Sumatra, watching people do things in those communities, little things sometimes, but others see those actions and then start asking about them. It's like planting a seed.
Yeah.
That's the goal that sometimes maybe is hard to see. If we start something small, you throw a pebble in a pond and you see those ripples, but you don't always see the ripples that make it all the way to the far shore, because that's out of your sight.
Right. You just have to have trust that it's working. That's how education is too. It's almost never do you see the immediate effects of education, but maybe 10 years down the line, somebody will come back to you, hopefully, and be like, that you were my favorite teacher, or that program that I did, I still remember.
Whatever field you're doing that work, whether it's in a nature center as an educator, or you're in a classroom, you look at all these little faces and these little minds and you go, where are they going to be in a decade? What I'm doing, is it going to influence the way they think? I wanted to ask you, as a podcaster of a environmentally based podcast, what is the question you've never asked yourself? With each one of your guests, you're thinking about the things that they do and you're asking them questions. What is the question you would ask yourself right now about why your journey matters?
That specific question, like, why does my journey matter? What difference does it make? As you know, like, producing a podcast is not as easy as people assume it might be. Forces for Nature has been a passion project for the last 6 years. So
why did you start Forces for Nature? Let's start there. Why did you even bother with this idea? You were an educator. I mean, you were developing education, and we'll touch on some of that in your background in a minute. But why this idea, and why then?
Well, it's kind of funny, actually. So I was doing environmental education when we were living in Panama, but then my husband got a different job, and it moved us to Colombia. And in Colombia, I no longer had a work permit, so I couldn't go and get a traditional job. This was before the pandemic, where, work from home was a normal thing. So I was trying to figure out, what am I going to do? Conservation is my passion. So how can I stay connected to it until I'm able to get, a traditional job? And at the time I was getting into podcasts, and I was like, well, let me just start a podcast. And it was, it's a big bite to take, but it's been great because, the idea the whole time was to start this podcast, to interview people and stay connected, to know what's going on in the field, and, have my ear to the ground until circumstances changed. And that ended up being a really great idea, because I kicked off the podcast February of 2020. The world shut down in March of 2020. And I was able to keep doing this. It's just kind of taken on a life of its own. 2 or 3 years later, an organization called Healthy Seas, who I interviewed for the show, came back to me, and they said, hey, we want to start a show. Can you produce it for us? And so I started producing for them. It's just starting to take on its own life. And I'm looking to grow it in different ways, either by getting more sponsorships or producing shows for others. And that's what got me. But what started was kind of just staying connected.
What do you think about this as a outreach tool for education, especially around the environment?
I love it. Of course, I'm biased, but podcasts are an opportunity to go deep into a subject. With social media, like, if you can get somebody's attention for 10 seconds, that's a long amount of time. But if you have a podcast and you're able to get them for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, like, you can really go deep into a topic. People are able to listen. Like, they don't have to be staring at a screen to listen. So they could be cooking or cleaning or working out or just taking a walk and still be connected. I find it more accessible. I find it more evergreen, and I find it to be a better way to talk about different subjects.
That's the question I guess I really wanted to get to. How can we use this to talk about those subjects in a different way? By going more in depth, obviously that's one element of it. But is there, it feels like we're at extremes in attention span. It's either 3 seconds or 10 seconds on a video short. And especially when it comes to students, you're looking at, and anyone from grade school on up, it's like, boom, 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 if it's not hitting them. But what's interesting is the other side of it. Like, in this format, podcasting, people, they can listen to 30 minutes or an hour or more. I mean, there are podcasts out there that go for 2 and 3 hours.
Yeah. And you can learn all new things. And if you want to upskill yourself, you can teach yourself about just conservation projects in Africa, or, all these different topics are available out there. I mean, podcasts have incredible niches that you would never even expect.
I know that you've developed some curriculum materials. You've worked for Emerging Wildlife Conservation Leaders Program. When you're talking to others and they're trying to explore their path about how to communicate environmental education. They want to be involved. You have a teacher who wants to make this a part of their classroom curriculum. What's the baby steps that they should take? And I need to make this part of what these kids are going to leave this class with. How do they make that first step?
I always say there's hope in action. And I think for the teacher and then subsequently the students to feel hopeful and positive and motivated in being able to take action for the environment, you do want to search out those success stories and show them how things, finding those positive stories, those case studies, the examples of how there is progress being made. It does give them something to hold on to. And I have found, this is the reason why I try to be as positive as I can in everything that I put out, is because I find it to be more effective at getting people motivated and to actually take action rather than the doom and gloom. That just makes you want to curl up into a corner. For a teacher hoping to instill this in their students, I would try to find those positive stories that they can share. But also what I really think is lacking with everybody, not just children anymore, is our connection to nature. We have such a disconnect nowadays that it's hard to get them to the point where they think nature is important enough to take any kind of action for, because it's so out there and they're in here. And so maybe the first step would even just be get them outside, do any kind of lesson outside, math, language, science, just get outside, start feeling the grass, start connecting with the things around you. Maybe from that connection, things can grow.
Your podcast, I think, does a brilliant job of that. It by its very title, Forces for Nature. I mean, these are people, and I'll let you describe it a bit more, but I mean, you have people who have done amazing things and are off the radar. No one, I mean, you're bringing them to light in many cases that people have not heard of some of these people. Since we're going to refer to it so often, maybe talk about Forces for Nature, what you started it to do, what it has done, and where you think it's going in terms of its impact. And then there's a couple of guests that you've had on. I've listened to a handful of them, and I think it's a great opportunity. If you're out there listening to this and you said, okay, well, what can I do to be positive about that? Go listen to your podcast. I mean, that would be my first thing, is you're going to hear a lot of really diverse individuals who are doing positive things in the world. I want to refer to some of those, so maybe we can start there. Let's start with the podcast and those sort of 3 steps, beginning, middle, and where you think you are now with it.
So the beginning started with 2 different catalysts. So the first was when I was working in Panama. I was working with the Smithsonian down there, and they, at the time, held this new event called the Earth Optimism Summit. And it was my job to bring the Earth Optimism Summit down to Panama. And it was really interesting. Earth optimism was this concept developed by one of their scientists named Nancy Knowlton. And she, in her work, she was always talking about the doom and gloom. She was an ocean scientist. And she said herself, she felt like she was always writing the ocean's obituary. And when she changed her communication to look at the success stories and the positive things that were happening for the ocean, she was surprised at the response that she got. And people were thanking her for bringing those stories to light. And so I myself, too, used to communicate in the doom and gloom narrative, trying to lay guilt on people for not wanting to recycle or not recycling correctly or not caring enough. That was totally me. And I learned from Nancy and the Earth Optimism movement that there was another way, and I found it to make me feel better. So there was that. And then the other catalyst was I remember, just meeting up with some friends one night and just chatting. And a friend of mine turned to me and said, like, but Crystal, like, what could I possibly do for the environment? Like what action that makes any difference? Like, what kind of impact could I make? And I found this is something I think about every day. And I found myself kind of tripping over my words with giving him an answer that was like more profound or more significant than like stop using straws or something silly like that. And I said to myself, like, this is what I want to do. Like, I want to answer that question for people because, when you're watching the documentaries and reading the stories and everything, you might feel motivated to do something, but you don't know what it possibly could be that you can do. And so I started Forces for Nature with the idea of I wanted it to be positive, and I want to answer people's question, what could I do about whatever that topic is that we talked about that day, whether it's poaching or deforestation or climate change or anything like that. I wanted people to walk away feeling like, okay, there's this problem, but there's something I could do, even if it's just talking about it. So that's how Forces for Nature came to be. Yeah, I'm at a point now too where I'm wondering where I want to take it. Like, maybe this is where I hang my hat and end on a high note, because my last season was just felt so good for me, and I loved the people that I had the opportunity to chat with. And I was like, do I just walk away and leave on a high note? But I don't think that's going to be the case.
If you had to cherry pick a couple, either from this last season or before, I mean, there's a couple I've cherry picked on there. I mean, one of them is this little boy that you did. It was early on, and he embodies that thing that I think all of us strive to do, and that is energy of youth that just does not see those hurdles or roadblocks, doesn't necessarily look at the goal because they're so driven by the moment. So maybe you can tell the story. But wait, before we do that, Crystal, let me take a quick break and check in with Stacy Pierpoint. Hi, Stacy.
Thanks, Jerry. Hi, everyone. I'm Stacy Pierpoint, Director of Communications at the North American Association for Environmental Education. Thanks for tuning in to The World We Want and this inspiring conversation about hope and action between Crystal and Jerry. Our podcast is all about shining a light on changemakers who are using environmental education to improve the world around us. At NAAEE, we're working with educators across the globe like Crystal to create a healthier and more sustainable future for all of us. And of course, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@NAAEE.org. If you feel inspired by what you've heard, please share this episode with your friends. And also, if you could, take a minute to rate and review The World We Want. It makes a huge difference. You can learn more about our mission and how to connect with and support us on our website, NAAEE.org. Thanks so much for listening. And now back to Jerry and Crystal in the studio.
Thanks, Stacy. And now back to my conversation with Crystal DiMi and that story about young Ryan.
Ryan was one of my favorite guests. He is like, I want to be like him when I grow up. The time I interviewed him was, this has got to be a few years ago already, and I think he was 11 at the time. And he had this booming recycling business. It was just something that he became very interested in when he was 3 years old, picking up litter off the beach and then recycling it. And then he started getting his neighbors involved, and he has just steadily grown since to have this little company that goes around and picks up people's recycling and donates his proceeds to marine mammal rescue, which is adorable. It was so exciting to see someone so passionate, so young, and not distracted by the weight of the world and all of the other things that kids and adults get distracted by.
That was the joy of that piece, because how do you keep that energy, that positive energy alive, especially the next decade and a half in a child's life? In 2 or 3 years, there's just heaps of distractions there. And I think that must be what confounds educators so much at that age, is how do you engage them to be that positive about what they can do and create the change that they can create?
Yes, that is the $1 million question right there. I do have to give credit to his parents. They're pretty phenomenal people just to even support him, because it's not like he's driving around picking up things like his parents are. But for teachers and, what teenagers and children can do in general, because a couple of my best friends are teachers, and friends of mine have children, and I feel like there's a purpose problem these days. First of all, they're getting bombarded by all the doom and gloom. So that just shuts them down. It's very overwhelming. Let me take that back. Let me take the purpose problem thing back. I feel like they are, especially because they're so connected nowadays with social media, they're bombarded with the doom and gloom and not necessarily the good stuff that's happening. And so they're just checking out. They feel like, well, what's the point? That many of us often feel, but as a kid, you don't know how to get yourself out of that hole as easily. And so they're just, like I mentioned before, they're just curling up in a corner and checking out. And I've done education programs with high schoolers who that's their attitude. Like, this sucks and I'm so mad about it. So it's pointless. And that's where I think we need to show them the examples of where it is working and who's working on it, especially like examples of people their age, like Ryan. He's like, all right, well, he's doing it. And so how can you do it too?
Have you followed up with Ryan?
I followed up with him a year later, and that was about 2 years ago. Since then, I haven't, but I still follow him on social media, and I still receive his newsletter, and I know that he's still receiving awards and being featured here and there. So he's out there rocking it.
And that positive feedback has got to make a huge difference. I know that you've created some curriculum around sustainability. You want to talk a little bit about that and explain what that is? Because I think that's about creating positive action, right?
Yeah, exactly. So after a few years of doing Forces for Nature, I felt the need to kind of get back to my environmental education roots and still answer people's question, like, what could I do? And so I created this curriculum for high school and university students where it looks at the top actions that they can take that have the most bang for your buck, essentially. I teach about them. We talk through them. There's behavior change psychology embedded into the way the program is structured. So it's not just here's a list of things you can do. We're all given lists of things we can do. We all write lists like New Year's resolutions. This is my list of things I'm going to do. But that's not going to guarantee anybody's going to do any of it. So you have to have these other elements that help people change their habits over time. And so the program has those elements in it to hopefully get them to change at least one habit by the end of the program.
So in that list of things, what's are they major impacts? Like what kind of, tell me about that list.
Yeah. So there are a number of different things that we focus on, but I have found that people respond more readily to the food element one. So it's food in two ways. One, eating a more plant-based diet. We don't talk about you have to be vegan, But by eating a more plant-based diet, you have a lot of really good benefits that come from it. So, for example, the science journal Nature had an article come out that talked about how if people reduced their meat consumption by 1/5, like say you eat meat 5 days a week and you just take away 1 day a week, we can half deforestation. Like, that's incredible. Yeah. And Nature is like one of the best science journals out there. So by just eating plant-based, 1 full day a week, we have this huge impact. And it also has these ripple effects for climate, and then also for humane reasons for animals.
But also personal health, just your own personal health.
100%. Yeah. It's so much better for your heart and your arteries and your whole body to eat more plants. So eating a more plant-based diet, and also reducing your food waste. Because if food waste were a country, it would be the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. Yeah. And
You're kidding. Wow.
Yeah. And that's because of the way we dispose of our food waste, which it often goes to landfills. And when you throw something in a landfill, it's not going to decompose the same way, because things just get buried in a landfill. And when they're decomposing, they're not exposed to oxygen. So there's anaerobic decomposition, which produces methane, and methane is a very strong greenhouse gas. If you just reduce your food waste by meal planning, eating leftovers, freezing things, not buying things you aren't going to eat all of, it's a huge impact.
And food is something that's so close to all of us, regardless of what age we are. When we start talking about nature-based education or environmental education, is bringing it back to things that people relate to immediately. I asked you earlier about, where an educator can start with their classroom and get this going. And I often think, start with the things that connect you as much as anything, because food is a great example of that. If we all have to eat every single day, we all have to think about the air we breathe every day. We all have to think about the water we drink every day, just for our own personal health. And if we can break those things down into things that become stories that become really interesting, I think, and draw people in. That's what I mean. The story with Ryan is so fun. Do you have you said you have a couple of others. Do you have a couple of those that you can share that you think do that really well?
Just last season, I spoke to somebody who works for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. And that is, Chesapeake Bay is this bay that is in the Virginia, Maryland. It goes further north too. Forgive me for not remembering exactly, but it's this huge bay that gets fed by, I think, 5 different states with all of its tributaries. And his job is to get people who don't necessarily live on the bay to connect with it and want to protect it. And so he's always looking for that story, like you were just saying, that people can relate to and realize, I don't live on the bay, but I really care about XYZ, or I really like eating crabs, or I want to make sure that the water supply is healthy, and so he's always tapping into people's local experience in the area that he can then extract it out to the bay and help get people to want to protect the bay even more.
That may be one of the most difficult things, I think, when it comes to education, is connecting people to things that they don't immediately touch every day. and getting them to see that connection. And so it takes a little work, and that's where I think the storytelling becomes so powerful, because it makes people pause for a moment and just think differently about that.
And see themselves in that story.
We all have these stories, large and small, whether they're the Ryans and doing that, or, you work at the Smithsonian Institute and you on, ocean health there. And I think finding our own story so we feel positive about telling it.
That is so true. And I really think it's so underrated because it sounds so simple. And because of that, I think people just dismiss it, and it's not funded enough, for example. And I think stories are the entry point to any kind of environmental work you want to do. You have to get people to want to do it. And sometimes it's going to be that story that gets them excited about it. Just a few weeks ago was the DC Environmental Film Festival. And I went and I saw a few different films, and they were all stories that I didn't know before. And then after seeing them, I was like, I want to help them. Like, I want to do this and I want to donate there. And because it was storytelling and it just hit the heartstrings, and it was so effective that way. And I might not have been as motivated by just like a simple little, not an emotional story.
What's your story and how you got to being a storyteller, story presenter?
What is my story? So,
were you the kid that, couldn't stay in the classroom because you were like chasing animals all over the place, or like?
It's really funny in that, so I grew up in a suburb outside of New York City, and like being in nature wasn't my thing. It wasn't my parents' thing. I remember going camping with my cousins. Like, my family went camping with my cousins, and my dad somehow MacGyvered our tent to have electricity. And in the van that we arrived in, he had a TV and a VCR. Like, this was not nature camping. But when
you invented glamping.
We invented glamping. Totally. It started in New York. But what I did innately have was a love for animals. I mean, I remember having, I have a picture of me as, I think maybe I was 1, and I'm sitting in a dog bed because I'm waiting for the dog to come back. And I think I was 7 when I begged my parents for us to take in the stray cat that was in the neighborhood. So I had always had a deep love for animals, and a summer job at a veterinarian when I was a teenager made me realize that wasn't the job that I wanted, because that's what I thought I wanted to do with my life. And then, there was blood and guts and like all sorts of things that I was like, maybe this is not for me, but what could be for me? And when I was thinking about going to college, I was like, what can I do with my love of animals that doesn't have blood and guts and all that stuff? And I thought I could protect nature. I could protect their home for them. And that's where I came from. I went on a summer semester to New Zealand, and we went hiking, and I was wearing jeans. Like, I was not even like prepared, like people who are in nature more often are prepared. And I was coined the city girl very immediately in that trip. So yeah, I started just because I wanted to protect the home for animals. I wanted well-being for all beings.
Well, that's pretty amazing to think that you were hiking in jeans, invented glamping, hiking in jeans, and then you end up in Panama, nature centers. That's a great story in itself. And that anyone listening out there, if you're using this as like, how do I get to do what Crystal's doing? Yeah, you can start anywhere you want to start, I guess, and get there.
Okay. So, and I want to add this part too, because I ended up going to, there's a state New York State school called the College of Environmental Science and Forestry. And I went to that school. Like I was in it. I was, definitely going to do something for the environment. And when I went to New Zealand, I think this was the end of my junior year, I was kind of feeling like an imposter because everyone around me at that school looked the part. They were quote unquote like the stereotypical environmental advocate person, in nature, knew how to camp properly and hike properly. And I was feeling like an imposter. And I remember on that trip to New Zealand, I promised myself I would say yes to every opportunity. And we had this opportunity to summit the pinnacle of this mountain range. It might have been called the Pinnacles, actually. And we hiked up before dawn. And as we reached the top, the sun was starting to come up, and the lake was shining silver on one side, and the valley was like sparkling green on the other side. And the colors were just so spectacular. And I remember finally thinking to myself, I belong here. I might not fit the typical mold of who you would think is going to be fighting for the environment. And that is like, I'm being very stereotypical in that statement. So forgive me for that. But I finally felt like I belong here in whatever shape or form I take. I want to protect this beauty around me.
That almost sounds like the last question we ask everybody on this podcast. What is the world you want? You want the world that you can protect. Before I let you out the door, I do want to ask you about the Emerging Wildlife Conservation Leadership Program, which I know you're a part of, and because I don't know much about it. Just a little bit that I read on the website. It just sounds really fascinating to me. And I was like, I want to be a part of that.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. What is it and what's your role?
So the Emerging Wildlife Conservation Leaders, otherwise known as EWCL, is my happy place. So it is this training opportunity for emerging wildlife conservation leaders where they do these 2-year classes, and you get trained on different skills that you need to become a leader in this profession. And you work in groups on a particular wildlife campaign. So for example, when I was in the program in 2010, my group worked on a bat guano project. And that sounds crazy, but long story short, bat guano was being harvested in unsustainable ways, and we came up with some guidelines on how to make it more sustainable. We worked with Bat Conservation International, and that was a project that they needed help with. And so that was our project. Explain to everyone who's listening why you would harvest bat guano. It's a fantastic fertilizer. And it's used in like artisanal. Well, I don't know if artisanal would be the right word to say. I mean, it's not like a commercial fertilizer you're going to find at Home Depot necessarily. It's usually harvested more locally, and there's just no regulations around how to do it to protect the bats and to protect the humans doing it. Because especially when you're harvesting in caves, there's issues with off-gassing and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, so it's very random, and they have more normal campaigns that help protect pangolins and lions and rhinos and whatnot. This was a very random one, but very special. But anyway, so I was in their leadership program for 2 years, and then just stayed connected with them throughout the years, because the people that you meet there, that's just another thing, is it's so important to surround yourself with people who, feel like you're people. You share the same values and the same passions and the same desires. And to be surrounded by people like that was just so soul enriching. And so I've kept in touch over the years. And it also didn't hurt that I met my now husband through EWCL, and he's a board member. And so I've been involved on the back end of things. And then last year, I was invited to help plan their 20th anniversary summit, which just took place this past December. And it was so wonderful to bring everybody back together again. And it's such a positive place and so supportive. Everyone wants to help one another. Everyone feels like they're family. It's this wonderful opportunity. And if you're mid-career environmental wildlife professional, look into it because it is the best thing you can do for yourself.
We'll make sure that in the blog that accompanies all of this at NAAE, we'll make sure that there's a link to the program there, as well as Forces for Nature. So we'll make sure that those things are all on there. So it was such a fascinating program, and I'd encourage everybody listening to dive into it, follow the link and see what the program's about, because it just seemed really fantastic. And as you said, thrust yourself into situations where not everybody thinks like you do. You have to understand why people think maybe the way they do and don't think exactly like you, and they approach things differently. But at the same time, I think, as you said, it's so soul enriching, comforting to have sometimes be in those places where people they think like you and they share your passion.
Well, just on that note, I think this is something that I've been very, very conscious of lately, is connecting with the other side that you don't think, that you feel like doesn't think like you. When you do have conversations with people, you start to realize you have a lot more in common than you realize. You might just have different ways of getting to the same goal. I think for environmental communicators, and I know especially for myself, I'm in a learning pattern right now of how I can be a bridge rather than just speaking into an echo chamber.
I would normally end by asking you what's the world you want, but I think you've been talking for the entire podcast about a lot of the world that you want. And the exciting thing is with Forces with Nature, for Nature, I think you've created something that starts telling people the world you want, all those voices that you have brought.
Yeah. I think by empowering people to know how they can make change also can lead us down the path of the world we want. A lot of the times, non-eco-friendly behavior is not done out of malice. It's just done out of overwhelm and confusion and not really knowing what you can possibly do. So if you can empower people with things that they can do, then we are more likely to get to that world we want.
After people finish listening to this podcast and they were going to jump over to Forces for Nature, which podcast, I know this is like picking your favorite child, but which podcast of yours would you say, listen to that one first, and that will give you a feeling for what you've done? Is there one that you think just kind of would resonate to most?
The last episode actually is one that I'm so proud of. I spoke with Derek and Beverly Jobert, who are
amazing photographer, filmmakers.
Yeah. And they've had a lifetime of having incredible impact in Africa through their film, their photography, their advocacy, their tourism businesses. And to have had the opportunity to talk with people of that caliber, I just felt so humbled and honored to chat with them. Like, they gave me, little old me, the time of day, and it was a wonderful conversation. And you know, they're a little different than your everyday person who's just trying to be more eco-friendly, because they've been doing this, you know, hardcore, big time for 40 years. But they're so accessible, and I think their story is fascinating. So I would start with the last episode, which with Eric and
well, since podcasts are evergreen, what episode number is that?
That's a smart question. It's the episode with Derek and Beverly Jobert, and I should know this off the top of my head. 109.
I'm really appreciative that humble little you, as you called yourself a moment ago, were kind enough to share the last hour with us on The World We Want. This has been really a pleasure. Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you so much, Jerry. This has been so fun to chat with you.
I want to thank Crystal. The challenges we face are not simple, and it's not easy to ask yourself, what can I actually do? With a clear focus on finding answers, she has become a force for nature. You can find more about Crystal and her podcast, Forces for Nature, through the links on our website at NAAE.org/podcast. As you've just heard, environmental education is as multifaceted as the diversity of guests we have on our podcast. To explore more, subscribe to the World We Want podcast on our website or wherever you listen to your favorite stream. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear what resonates with you. And if there's an aspect of environmental education you want to know more about, let us know, and we can follow up in a future podcast. You can write us at podcast@naaee.org. This has been The World We Want, a co-production of the North American Association for Environmental Education, NAAEE, in partnership with nonprofit Globio, with generous funding through the EE360 Plus program. A special thanks to our entire podcast team, Judy Browse, Stacy Pierpoint, Jimena Cuenca, and Globio's Pippa Calville. And everyone at NAAEE and Globio would like to thank you for being a part of the world we want. We hope our conversations inspire you to take action in your own world every day to ensure we build a world we all want. I'm Jerry Ellis. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing The World We Want, an NAAEE podcast.